You're watching Fish Plates and Scratch Builds. I'm Jonathan, and today I'm going to take you on a tour of my 00 gauge layout, Addleford Green. Let's take a look. Welcome to my first video of 2026. Now, I'm not entirely sure when this one is going out, but I do want to take this opportunity to say Happy New Year to every single one of my viewers. I hope you had a good start to the year. Now, as you're watching this, it's just coming up to a week since I attended my very second ever model railway exhibition with my layout, Addleford Green. Now, this was bigger in many ways than the last one I went to. It was over 2 days. It was in a bigger venue, and there were many more layouts, traders, and also visitors as well. And on top of that, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet many of the people who watch this channel. So if you came along to the Maidstone exhibition and said hi, thank you, because it was wonderful to meet so many people and to hear so many people say that they've watched my videos and they've enjoyed them as well, which makes it all worthwhile, I think, too. So thank you so much for coming by if you were able to. Now, the other thing that was so much bigger at the event was the sense of pressure to run a really professional layout and have some trains moving around and, you know, have some really interesting activity. Now, there were some teething issues. Addleford Green is not a layout that was ever built to go to an exhibition. It was only really built to leave this shed if it ever needed to, but not really to operate or be set up anywhere else. And as a result, there were some issues, some of which I knew about from the previous exhibition that I've yet to get around to fixing, and some which I thought weren't that big a deal, but were a big deal when they have to be dealt with over 2 full days. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to show on camera some of the things that I'm going to do to fix them? But then I realised that, well, I've never actually really shown Addleford Green in its entirety on this channel. I've got a video which shows a very curated view of Addleford Green. Pop a link just up here for you, and also in the description as well if you haven't seen that one. But it is very much a kind of fantasy video. It's trying to present the layout as if it's a real place. But what I wanted to do in this video was take a step back, both figuratively and literally, and show the layout in, well, where it is in the shed, show it in context, show it as a layout rather than a small fantasy world. So what I wanted to do was show you how Addleford Green looks right now, maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done in building it, some of the problems I encountered, and maybe some of the solutions that I've thought up. So think of this as a kind of virtual tour of the layout, warts and all, if you like. So I feel like that's enough waffling. I think this video is going to largely speak for itself. So I'm going to grab the camera and we're going to go and have a proper look at this. And I'll see you in a second. Okay, there is Addleford Green in all her glory, sitting in the shed. And this is the main scenic board. As you can see here, it is about 5 feet in length and about 18 inches deep. And then over this side we have a small joining board, we'll talk about that later, and the fiddle yard here as well, and we will of course come and look at that in greater detail as well. So the main board sits on 2 wooden A-frame type legs, which I constructed, so, you know, they're not exactly perfect, but they do a good enough job at keeping the layout held up on this bench. Now, I was very lucky. I inherited this shed as part of this house when I moved in, so this is a brilliant room for model railways, really. So you can see that this bench here is about, I'd say, waist height. and these A-frame legs bring up the height of the layout to a reasonable working level. And this is roughly the height that I had the layout set at during exhibitions as well. So it's a good way to sort of test how stuff will look. So coming in a little bit closer then, we have the main layout itself. So as you can see, there's a thin bar of wood which runs along the front here. Now, this was largely never intended to be permanent because it was just to kind of keep the whole thing square and stable for transporting, whereas it tends to stay in place more or less now. I've fixed underneath here an LED strip, which the camera's probably not going to like too much, and that just throws down a little bit of light on the front of the layout. It largely hasn't seemed to be needed in exhibition spaces, but it's actually quite handy in the shed because the lighting in here is not perfect, and this helps just get a little bit more diffused LED type lighting over the whole thing. Carrying on with the theme at the back, these back scenes just here, these are a material called Foamex. So it's a bit like foam board, but it's all kind of plastic, I guess. I don't really know. It's kind of like foam board because it's ever so slightly spongy, but it's very, very durable. And it's very resistant to things like moisture as well. So it's quite easy to wipe it clean. Now, the picture on the back there was taken by myself using one of those cameras that has like a panorama feature on it. I basically went 5 minutes drive up the road, and this is a literal view of the Kentish countryside 5 minutes away from my house, and I sent that off to a printer online. I just picked whoever was the cheapest really, and they printed it directly onto this Foamex, and I think it's about 3mm thick, very easy to cut with a craft knife as well. I basically worked out what size strips I'd need and what the division of the image would be across them as well, and that seems to work quite well. Now, one thing I wouldn't do again, and this shot I think here kind of explains why, is I wouldn't have back scenes with big sharp corners on them, and that's largely because you get these horrible shadows. You can't really hide the fact that it is in fact just a big corner. It doesn't look great, and there's a few areas where I think I would try harder to blend the back scene in, such as where the road disappears into literally nowhere over here, and also where it does the same over here by the Ford Anglia. Now, I have seen people who have put a kind of suggestion of the road disappearing into the distance on their layouts, and it looks really good. So I think really in the future I would try and work those two things together a little bit better, rather than it being largely a bit of an afterthought. Now, most of this I imagine you've probably seen in previous videos, some of these scenic areas, or in some of the pictures that I've shared so far on Instagram. But we'll do a flyover nonetheless. I've probably said before that all of the buildings on here are scratch built, so I have built all of them mostly from raw materials, the odd 3D printed or laser cut part, and the two buildings you can see right now, the station master's house on the right and the station building on the left, I have a video for each of those and how I built them, and I will be hopefully bringing out a video on how I built the farm over here, most of these farm buildings, and also eventually the engine shed, and of course Addleford Creamery as well. So I have videos planned eventually for each one of these two. And of course, with my new layout that I'm planning, I hope to actually build some things from scratch for you to see sort of in process rather than after the fact as well. So let's get a bit more technical. The track. So I had some comments about the track. It's nothing special, basically. It is just Pico Streamline for the most part, but it is Code 100. The there's nothing special about it. I think maybe going forward I would use something closer to Code 75, something a little bit finer. But for the most part, it's all just Pico. It's Pico streamline points with a bunch of Pico Code 100 flexible track in between. That's as simple as that. The only other thing that I've done is I have wired droppers. I've soldered dropper wires to the underside of every single piece of track. And in between them, and I don't know, you probably can't see, where is one? There we go. So in between these 2 points, there are some insulated rail joiners. So they're made of plastic. And that means that power does not carry between the 2 rails. And I've done that on every single piece of track. And the reason for that is the droppers provide power to every bit of track without relying on the joiners to carry power, which can get clogged with dirt and they can fail to carry power. That's perfectly possible. But the other reason is I am not using DCC. This is a DC layout. And basically I want loads of isolating sections on the layout because I want to be able to stop my locos in certain places and move other locos on the same board. And you could say, well, DCC will probably do that a lot easier for you, but it's not something I've got into just yet. Maybe in the future. It seems like a lot of expense and a lot of research, and I'm sure plenty of people who are using it will say, no, that's not the case. But for me, it's a personal choice. And quite honestly, I just love the tactile nature of having proper switches, which makes me sound really old-fashioned, despite the fact that I do love technology. I love new technology and clever things. But you know what? You can't go wrong with just a good switch. And I will show you the control panel and all of the wiring underneath the layout very shortly. Now next I want to take you through, well, we're not going to go through here because my camera won't fit, but we're going to go where the trains go, and that's through the back scene around here. And you can possibly see I've made an effort to try and hide that by putting the creamery in front of it. It works if you're viewing the layout from here. It doesn't really work if you're viewing the layout from literally anywhere else. I could have maybe put some, like, I don't know, maybe I could put some pipes going across it and suggest the facility existing on the other side as well. But I think it's fine for what it does at the moment. So let's go through there, because there is a major problem on this side. This is one of the big problems that I have. I don't know how well the camera will cope around here because it's a bit darker. And you might see this board here, and you can see that it is comprised of a few bits of actually set track, some rather sharp curves that bring us through here onto the fiddle yard board. And the reason for this joining piece is because I designed Addleford Green in the beginning and adamantly did not want to have a fiddle yard on it. Hate the idea of fiddle yards. I resent is probably the word, actually. I resent the fact that I need all of this space to store my trains, which could otherwise be scenic. I really get upset by that. So what I did was I was very adamant I wasn't going to have one. I tried all sorts of ideas. I was going to have just like a little bit of track that poked out the back and stuff like this, but it soon became clear, and this was before I had any idea of going to exhibitions, it soon became clear that actually that was never going to work, because I would have to go around the back, I'd have to reach on and pull the loco off, and then I'd have to put another one down, and it would completely disrupt the flow of operating trains from one end to the next. So that meant when it came to creating a video, which I realised I would actually have to have, I had a problem. I had put the track coming out at the very far back of my layout, but I wanted a traverser type fiddle yard, which made most sense to have the track enter at the middle here, so that the slidey compartment had enough room to slide all the way to track 1 and of course all the way to track 5. If this came in at either end, the tray would have to overhang on one of these ends, and it wouldn't be quite as convenient. So that was mistake number 1, not considering the fiddle yard, and that meant this rather awkward, dodgy board had to go in. Now the way this works is, you can probably see these awkward wires underneath. They are wired into the tracks themselves, probably easier at this end. So literally soldered onto the side of the rails there. And then they are basically plugged in using one of these, called like a radio plug, the round ones. Goes in there. So, and there's one that goes in that side as well. So basically the power comes from the board, is sent through here, and then is actually carried across the track. So these are the only places where the power is carried along by metal rail joiners. Back through here, into here, and then a complicated array of wires under here go up into these tracks, but not before they pass through this. And this is a little dial that we can change to different numbers, and we can also turn it on, or we can isolate power to this board entirely, which is very useful. Because if every line is filled up with locos and you can't switch it to one that doesn't have one, when you're doing some shunting on the main board over here, you may end up with a loco that's just deciding it's going to creep off the end, and that has actually happened to us. So yeah, so the dial selects the track basically. So they're all numbered 1 to 5, and it's numbered 1 to 5 here. It's very straightforward. Brilliant switch this. It's very complicated underneath as a switch, but once you get it set up, it's such a wonderful way of selecting a line. I know I'm getting excited about a dial, but I'm hoping to use that on my next layout as well for some line selection too. One of the major issues with this joining board, and there are a few, are the fact that it includes multiple joins in the track, and that they're not really very good. This literally just pulls off. And there are 2 rare earth magnets under there. So, oh gosh, they're quite tight. They're quite strong. So there's quite a grab there. But the problem is there is also a certain amount of slop in this. So you can see that although there are magnets, they will hold it in a variety of positions. And lining it up doesn't guarantee that it won't move later on in the day. So that's not fantastic. And the other problem is the curve. What I've been finding is long locos, such as my H-class and my rake of push-pull carriages, they really struggle to get around these corners because the couplings don't always follow each other very nicely. And sometimes there's a bit of buffer lock as well. And it's just unnecessary, isn't it? What I've realised is I can't change that here because I'm right against the wall here, so I couldn't push the fiddle yard back. But at an exhibition, that's not a problem because my A-frame legs can actually hold this further back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a straight piece to fit in here, and I'm going to design it in such a way that it fits better, there's no slop, and the lines are aligned as well as they can be. I'm not going to use the word perfectly. So basically I'm going to improve that, and it's going to be straight, and that will alleviate a lot of the stress of getting trains in and out of this fiddle yard. Okay, the next issue is also on the fiddle yard, and it is this little thing over here. Now I have had 2 different sort of locking systems on this layout, on this fiddle yard already. This is number 2, and how this works basically is it locates in one of these holes, which has basically a hole drilled slightly too big, and then a washer to locate it reasonably tightly. But again, as you can see, there's a fair amount of slop, which is very annoying and upsetting to me. And line 3 is perhaps one of the worst offenders in that. Look how much slop there is, and quite honestly I don't think you can even force this into alignment. It's so difficult. So that's going to go out Previously, I had a beam under here with some magnets on. You will watch this channel enough and you will find out that I love magnets. They're not always the solution, though. They're not always the solution. Yeah, I used to have a beam under there with some magnets on, which located, I think it was some washers, again, underneath. And actually, that worked really quite well. But the problem with that system was, every time it came to one of the lines, it would wrench the tray out of your hand to locate them with the magnets because they were so strong. And when you tried to break the contact, you'd really have to push it away. And what would happen is some of the locos would just literally fall over. They'd come right off the track. So that was a bit of an issue. So that version obviously went away and this one came in, and this one is no better. So I'm going to go next with a method that I've seen a lot, but was shared with me by someone at the first exhibition I went to. And it's basically a brass tube which is soldered onto here with a little bit of brass rod running through it, basically as a bolt. It's a bolt. It's a very thin, fine bolt. But the brilliant thing with it is it's very thin, it's very small, and it can be soldered to this copper-clad PCB, the sort of stuff that's used for circuit boards. And what you can do is you can line your track up, put something like a track setter in the middle to keep it clamped, and then you can solder the bolt, or solder the second bit on here with the bolt through it. And because everything's held in place and you're soldering it, you're kind of ensuring a really, really good connection for each of your lines as you do each one. So that's the plan. It's kind of hard to see here, but the actual tray for the Fiddle yard is built on a heavy duty, or a series of heavy duty draw runners. So I think they've got ball bearings in there, and they literally just slide out just like a drawer, really. So that's literally how the center bit is made. And I chose heavy duty ones because I wanted it to be as strong at its full extension as it is in its sort of closed state, if you like. So you can just see at the back there the back of the runners. So that just slides, and it's a very smooth motion as well. It seems to work very well in terms of a sliding motion. It really is just the fact that the tray requires a better system for locking it into position. Now, problem number 3 just in this area is this. Now, I want you to have a look at this. This is the front of the layout. And then I want you to come over here and have a look at this. This is also the front of the layout. But normally here I would have a big display board telling you about the layout. So no one can access this. So the main problem is that it's round the wrong way. I built this whole layout to be operated from the front because I'm here in my shed operating my layout as it sits right now from the front. But this is a massive problem when it comes to the exhibition. Now, this panel isn't really a big deal because you can reach over and you can largely see a lot of it from the back. But it's still not an ideal sighting for it, is it? So what I may do is just move it over to the back here. I don't think that'll be that big a deal. I may have to replace this top bit of wood, but fine, because otherwise it will have a big hole in it down this end, unless I put something else over the top of that. Yeah, there's some thought to be done there, but the fact that everything is all on the wrong side is quite a big problem. It just makes things really, really quite awkward. Now, carrying on from that, I'm going to take you over to the control panel. And I want you to have a really good look at this and have a think about what I've just said, because I've got the same problem here as well. I created this panel so it can be controlled from the front of the layout. Largely it would sit where it is right now. And of course this track plan on here is all completely front way round. Now I have to operate this from the back of the layout with all of this round the wrong way. And I have to try and remember this point is not on my left, it's now on my right. And when I flick it away from me, the points won't move that way, they'll actually move the other way. And I do actually manage to rewire my brain by the end of the first day. But it is such a pain. It is such a pain to deal with. So what I'm planning on doing with this thing is maybe getting a new top created. So you might see on the side here, this was created for me by a company called Flexgenics. That's Flex with 2 X's there, and Genix with an X as well. And I think they're still around. I've seen them at exhibitions. They make these wonderful laser cut sort of kits, these control panel kits, and I believe other things as well. And you can see how they've got the classic sort of slot together style. They come as a sort of flat pack kit that you assemble yourself. So this Addleford green name here, the totem, has been engraved in, and so have these lines along here. So I may get onto them and see if they'll create me another one, and I'll just basically have the same sort of layout, but I'll have the switches around the other way. Now what I'm hoping is when I open this up, and I will open it up in a minute so we can have a look inside together, I'm hoping that all I need to do is just basically turn everything around without rewiring and soldering and everything, because I don't really fancy doing that again. What you can see here is a Cobra cable. This is from Hobby Tracks. This is their system whereby you have a kind of circuit board with terminals inside there. You can easily wire straight into that. You plug in their Cobra cable and it goes all the way up to another one underneath. And as I said, I will turn this over and we'll have a proper look in a second. But this is how the control panel is connecting. And even something as simple as this being on the right hand side is also a bit of a pain on the day too, and could be much easier if it was on the left. So it may be that I will just get a whole new box entirely and just reorient everything inside it. But we'll see. There's one other problem I want to talk about, but what I'll need to do is I'll need to just flip the layout over on its side so we can have a look at the mess that is the wiring underneath. Okay, welcome to the very, very rarely seen underside of Addleford green. Now you might be thinking, what on earth does a layout of this size and this simplicity need so much wiring for? And that would be a good question, quite honestly, because I think maybe I've gone a little bit overboard. But let's start with the simple part. So this is the other end of that Cobra cable that I mentioned. So that goes all the way down and into the control panel when it's plugged in. And that is bringing with it the controller, obviously the power, which just down on the side there, I've got one for accessories, one for track. So the power and obviously the control of that power is being sent through it. The black ones here, these are points, so up or down. You've got isolating sections as well here. So I believe up is it's on and down is it's off. I can usually never remember which is which. And previously, it doesn't work at the moment, but I've got a button for the signal as well. It's a Dapple motorized signal. So all of that is sent through the little plug at the bottom and comes onto the board here. Now, just this sighting alone is not fantastic, because it would make more sense to plug this cable into, say, the back somewhere when you're operating from the back. But as you can see, there isn't really a lot of room to do that, and I've used some reasonably thick, chunky timber for this for the baseboard on this. So again, it's just another casualty of not really thinking about exhibitions. So I think that's definitely something I would do differently in the future. When I did build this, I did actually have this plug on the front. So I had built it perfectly fine for using at home. I just wasn't able to convert that to the back for exhibitions. So you can see each of the wires here. They're brought in by the cable. and then off they go across the board in various different ways. So I think for the large part, I've been able to keep the wire colours consistent. I did have to replace some not long ago, so I may have just used whatever I had to hand to just get the job done. But largely, red wires are power to the track, and orange wires are generally point motors, things like that. The blue and the brown thicker one at the top, that is the bus. So there is a kind of bus system on here. So blue and brown is the power in and out, basically. And you can see that they go through here. They go into this. They go down here and down here. Then they go along here and along here. And in fact, long story short, they go the full length of the layout. And each time they're connected to these chocolate blocks. And they take power, or power is taken off them, and then those are sent to, quite often, these bits here. Point the camera, that would help. To these bits here, and these are dropper wires. So anywhere where there is a kind of rectangle like this, that's my kind of way of saying, oh, that is a bit where the track is actively powered. This is a section that is actually physically isolated, which is ISO. There's another one over here. This is in the engine shed. So largely that's what all of this is along here. It is just one big power bus with the opportunity for other things to be taken off it as they go along. Now, I'm a massive fan, since finding out about them, of bootlace ferrules, which are these little chaps on the end of each of these wires. They are fantastic. They absolutely save the need for an awful lot of soldering. They allow me to use these chocolate block connectors, which would otherwise deform the end of the wires, because the ferrule gives the wire a really good bit of protection, so it can easily be clamped. They're just so much easier, and it makes replacing any single one of these wires a doddle rather than an absolute nightmare, because I have to unsolder, damage something because I've done it badly, melt some plastic, resolder. Yeah, just although this looks like an absolute nightmare, it is my dream. It is my dream. This works really well for me. Now, I said there was another problem under here besides all of this crazy wiring, and it's the point motors. So let's have a look at this one here. This is, if it's going to focus, this is an old Hatton's point motor, and I chose these, and I don't know why I chose these, because a better version, I think, existed at the time. But I chose these because they have this little arm on the side here. And what I've got set up is a little micro switch. And when the arm moves to this position, the switch is essentially pressed. When it moves here, it is unpressed, and you can hear it click. So I know it's not pressed, it is pressed. And that is to change the polarity of my electrofrog points. Now, I don't know how much everyone knows about what that is and how that works. But basically, the little metal bit in the middle of the point is called the frog. And on a lot of cheap track, such as your really basic set track, this piece is plastic. And that's because when a train's wheels cross over it, there is a possibility of them touching rails that have different polarities and causing a short. Now, that's a really big issue. So quite often manufacturers just make it out of plastic. But the problem there means that locos with short wheelbases are more likely to stall. So the solution is an electrofrog point, which allows you to still electrify the middle bit and make trains crossing over them a doddle. Well, in theory. What you have to do is a little bit more work underneath, a little bit of jiggery pokery, and you have to change the polarity of the middle section of the point depending on which way the blades are set. Now, you can get this wonderful thing here, which I bought at Maidstone from one of the traders. It is a Gauge Master seep point motor. It's the GMC PM1. It is a SEEP point motor with built-in switch. What a joy. Now, I reckon these probably have existed for a long time, and they probably existed when I set up my overly convoluted system here. Maybe they didn't, I'm not sure. I know SEEP have been around for a while. But what this does, this tiny, tiny little point motor here, let's see if we have a little look at it. So let's bring it over onto the board. So in comparison to the rather large chunky one I've got here, it's quite a small footprint, especially when you consider the two together here. This does the job of both of those parts, and that's because on here, and I don't know if we're going to be able to see it, there's a tiny little washer in the rod, and when it slides across, it makes contact on the circuit board with different parts. So you can use these contacts along the top edge here to wire something up, and just the very act of this rod moving across to a different contact is basically making an electrical change, an electrical switch. It's that simple. It's crazy, and it's blown my mind. So what I'm going to be doing is in time replacing my 5-point motors with these instead. Now, you might ask, why am I doing that? Why on earth would I do that when I've got a admittedly convoluted but working system? Well, that's because my system doesn't work. At home, I've never ever had any problems with these. They've always thrown reliably. They've been no problem whatsoever. At exhibitions, they never work. They never work. Almost all of them refused to throw when they had to push up against the switch. When they had to sit like that, they refused. And there is a fair bit of resistance there, I will admit. And of course, points not throwing immediately is a problem, but points not throwing fully is another problem, because it means that the blades aren't touching well enough and they're not passing current, and the locos are stalling in certain places as a result as well. So in order to make it smoother, I'm going to replace this outdated system with some of those SEEP point motors with the built-in switch. I think it will make the underside more reliable, and thanks to all of these ferrules that we've got in here, I can literally just unscrew them from their terminals, and all of these ones, very little to no soldering required at all, which is fantastic. I will have to solder contacts onto the point motor itself, but that's largely trivial. Yeah, there we go. So that's the underside of Addleford Green. Brief mentions, I've got one of the Woodland Scenics just plug light hubs down here, which controls most of the lighting on the layout. I also sneakily have some lights that are not part of that system, but I have been able to use their little sort of pressure plugs here to just join the wires in, and they work perfectly with it, which is really great. And they're my little Barley Twist station lamps. They work just fine off this system. This is great because it has these little dials here, so you can turn them to whatever intensity you want, meaning you don't have to sort of worry too much about resistors or anything like that. However, it is not exactly the cheapest system, so if you've got a lot of lights on your layout, you may find this is probably quite an expensive way of doing things. The only other thing down here is the bottom of the dapole signal. Because it protrudes a little bit out from under the layout here, it's got damaged. It was my own fault. I don't know how well we can see that there, but it has got cracked and some of the wires have been damaged there. So I need to take that off and see if there's any way it can be salvaged. It might be dead, unfortunately. I may get another one, or I may just leave it to be static, because I'm not sure how much it really adds when there's no other signals on the layout, and yeah, there's no other motorized signaling going on. So I don't know, I'll have a think about that one. So the last thing I want to show you really is inside the control panel. Just briefly have a little look inside there to see what the wiring is like in there too. Okay, here's the control panel. I've popped it down on the workbench so we've got some better light and can have a proper look at it. So embedded in here is a Gauge Master Series U control panel. So this is just a single track controller, but it does have a simulator on the side. And what this does is it's quite handy. It can be quite fun to use, but it does take a little bit of practice. Basically, it kind of simulates a slow start or stop for your loco. So if you make any changes on here, basically it makes it to the loco, but not immediately. So one thing you can do is you can bring your loco into the station and you can turn the dial all the way down to off. And instead of the train stopping immediately, the simulator will slow it down. And once you get the hang of how much it slows it down by, this can be a really quite neat feature. The other great thing is you can do the opposite. So when the train leaves the station, you can turn this dial up to whatever number you know is a sensible running speed for your loco, and the simulator will handle all of the gentle acceleration out of the station, which is quite a wonderful thing to do. I said before as well, we've got some isolating switches here which basically cut power to set areas of the layout where I know I want to hold locos, and of course momentary on-off switches for the points, so you can't hold them in position and burn out the solenoid motor. So I'm going to undo these bolts and get the top off, and we're going to have a little look inside. Okay, so 6 bolts all the way around the outside, and they locate rather nicely inside in these little brass screw thread things. I don't know what you call those. What I've done is I've arranged the wires so that they don't obstruct the opening of it, so we can still get inside. So this is the underside of the controller itself. I may have to bring this down. So on this side we have the underside of the controller itself. Pretty simple bit of kit really, to be honest. And those wires are then coming down here, and they come into this section down here. Losing track of them, and of course they are fed into from here. So I've got over here 2 again, I don't know what, I think they're called radio plugs, I think. And these are the sort of terminal that they go into. So they are glued in there. The glue didn't hold very well, so what I've also done is I've just basically put some screws in either side of them to make sure that they don't push through when you're plugging in from this side. The other one is the accessories one, so that goes over here to I think it's Gauge Master again actually, one of their CDUs or capacitor discharge units. So the purpose of this device is to store up a certain amount of power in these big batteries here, and then when one of the switches is pressed for the points, it sends a jolt of power over to them. So if you were to hold that switch down, you wouldn't send a continuous supply of electricity to the solenoid and burn it out, because that is perfectly possible and easy to do. So the CDU is a useful item to protect your solenoids, which can be very easily damaged otherwise. So that then goes into this bank of connectors here, and these are all color coded and going up here to these switches as well. You can see perhaps why I'm keen, if I do change this, to not have to resolder all of these switches. I'm hoping it'll just literally be a case of basically turning everything around that's inside here to make it an alternative orientation. Okay, so all of these switches have got either some orange and black cables coming off them or some red cables coming off them, depending on what they are. So the red ones are all for the track feeds, and the orange ones are for the point motors, and then the black ones, I think, are all the kind of returns. So they're kind of in and the out for the main track power. And then of course over on the right hand side here we have got a slightly different terminal, sort of a circuit board with terminal blocks on it. This is not the same one from Hobby Tracks. I think I bought these separately. I think the reason was the Hobby Tracks one was a bit too big to go in here. This form factor is actually perfect. This is a great setup for inside here. This works really well. And on the outside here, it has exactly the same connector that the Hobby Tracks one uses. It's a pretty standard connector used in other devices like PCs or printers, or it used to be. Probably not anymore. And then, of course, all of that is secured together with some little sticky back sort of tabs. I don't know what you'd call these either, with some little mini cable ties around them, and you can buy those on places like eBay for packs of 100 for a few quid. They're really handy for cable management. They're really brilliant. So that's the inside of the control panel. More reasonably ordered chaos, I like to think, and I hope that this will be a reasonably easy project to change around, because probably a lot of this can just be unstuck from its moorings and hopefully flipped around and then resituated inside another box, and hopefully that will provide us with fewer headaches when operating the layout at events. Before we finish, there's one final thing that I forgot to mention when we were looking at the main board, and you might have noticed them. It's these tiny little magnets, again magnets, that I've installed in the track. There's a few of them along the layout at different points. So we've got some here, in all these different parts of the track here, and there are also some over here, some of which I have hidden successfully and some not so much. And this is the early days of a magnetic uncoupling system which I've been trialling. Now, one thing you should never do is install an uncoupling system and then trial it at an actual event. This turned out to be a bad idea, because it's good, but it's a bit too good in that it uncouples almost everything that passes over it, including things you don't want uncoupled, which did become a bit of an issue. But I just wanted to just show it to you now, and I don't really want to focus hugely on this now, because I think I will probably make a whole separate video about this problem and how I've solved it. Well, I haven't solved it, but I'm hoping to. So the way it works is the wagon has, this is called the Kirby system of coupling or uncoupling, because it was created by a chap called Brian Kirby. There we go. And the way it works is you have basically a staple soldered or glued to the bottom of your tension lock hook. And if it is a shape similar to this, what happens is the magnet draws the staple downwards and lifts the hook up. So we should be able to demonstrate that over this one just here. There we go. So there's a very definite hook there. You can see that, a literal grab of the hook. Now I've only placed one down, and that means that the wagon does have to be lined up pretty well. It took a little bit of getting used to, but I did start to get a feel for where they were. But sometimes there is a little bit of shuffling back and forth, and you could install more than one. You could put a couple together there to increase your target area, if you like. Now this works really, really well. And as I said, it works perhaps a bit too well. I need to go back to the drawing board and think about how it will work for Addleford Green, because yes, it works really well and it's brilliant when a loco stops in the station and then it's just able to pull away from its wagons without any intervention from the controller. That is amazing. I think that looks great. but the problem is it doesn't look great when a loco pulls into the station and half of its carriages are running freely behind it. So it definitely needs some work, and that's probably going to be a video all of its own, because I feel like I'm so close. I'm so close to figuring it out, and it does look good when it works, like I said. So that's all I've got for you today. I hope you've enjoyed your little look at Addleford Green, your visit. Do let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see, or anything you'd like to see in more detail. I do hope to come up with another video soonish, covering some of the changes that I've made to the layout to try and improve it, because who knows, some people might be having similar issues, and maybe if we all share our solutions, we might help one another out. So thank you so much for joining me once again. Keep an eye out for more videos. I'll see you in the next one, and please take care. Bye bye.